I want like people to see the thought process, right? Like I want people to be like, you could make these things. Like this isn't like not just like, oh, I have brain blast ideas. It's like, how do you like think about how do you think about games like I think about games, right? Like how do you get to a point where you're confident in yourself to make a big project and it's not something that is daunting?
Welcome to the Draw Your Dice podcast, the show that calls on the champions and new contenders of the tabletop RPG arena. My name is Jeremy Gage, and I am learning about tabletop game design and publishing. If you are a budding game designer or a veteran looking for fresh musings, stay tuned as we learn about the inspirations, processes, and philosophies of professionals in the industry. All right, well then, welcome to the design trends sort of break in the show. So normally what I ask guests here is that whatever is like pinging on your radar consistently, like in your spheres of influence, Twitter, Discords, whatever have you, in the game design circles, what sort of trends are you seeing that you're really happy that people are exploring? Or what are some trends that you're seeing I know that a couple of guests have been, or at least I don't want to point fingers at any other guests, but are there any trends that you're seeing that are detractive in the scene that maybe you wish would stop being a thing? Or are there any trends that you want to speak into the ether that you want to see come to fruition?
Right. I think the thing that I'm really liking in the scene right now is, I think we're talking about like variety of game and like what is game and stuff like that. I think like the push for figuring out like digital, like being able to play games digitally is like something that I really like these tabletop games that are designed for the digital space, which, you know, came up due to necessity, due to a global pandemic. And like, and you know, you've had wonderful guests on who've talked about that, like Williams and NMS and stuff. But then like, I think like that's the thing that I really like is you see a lot of people, this is the GM-less corner, I guess, but like not even like, again, not even just GM-less, but like this idea of I'm seeing a bunch of games that are coming out that like after like kind of like Lyric Games did, I think, a wonder to the itch scene, at least in like the indie tabletop scene, where like if you are hip to them and like, again, like engage with them on their level, like you take them seriously, because there's still a lot of people who don't really take Lyric Games seriously, and I think that they're like missing out on like very crucial and interesting theory and design. Like I don't really design Lyric Games too much. I've designed maybe like one or two, but it's not how my brain works. But because I have paid attention to them, because I read them, because I like know designers who think like that, it has enriched me a lot. And so in that space, like, you know, there is this wonderful synthesis that's happening of like kind of like exponential knowledge and like growth, where you go like, oh, a game can be this, like you can take this from this game and like, you know, push it in weird ways. Like, what does it mean? I know like something that I've been thinking about now a lot is after Space Between Stars, where it's like everybody has the same powers, like it's GM-less to its extreme, where like, you know, everybody is playing the exact same game and like you all have like all these different powers and it's very internal. Like technically this game could be solo, now that I think about it, like to a degree, and like, you know, you're all like kind of moving and like everybody has say in every aspect of this narrative and in every way outside of your own personal character. And there's like this like GM agnostic idea of like pseudo GM-less, right? Like opt-in powers. Like, so it's like, you know, I'm trying to like think of specific examples, but like it's just something that I've been like seeing a lot more in games that are being made. This like, oh, I mean, like Bandit Blades, I would say is not GM agnostic, but it, like GM lessened, I think, is a good term for it. But like, oh, like let's broaden our horizons. Let's like break out of frameworks. I think that's the other thing that I really like is I'm seeing a lot of like original game design happening, or like hacks that are moving stuff in like bigger directions, right? Like this like kind of ambitious breakdowns of genre. Like somebody who doesn't have like an encyclopedic knowledge of like what the scene does. I know a lot of people who are like, oh, I know a lot about these games and where they come from, and like, you know, it's so much. So like I keep needing to reel myself back in, but like again, like that trend of like I'm seeing games think about games. I'm seeing designers think about play and interaction. Like you like a lot of game jams are like what if we just make games that are like, you know, that just kind of focus on like a format, games that focus on like hacks of indie games. So it's like, you know, here's an original indie game system. So it's not even like, let's make like, there's no like it's not like a PBTA jam, right? It's a one move jam. So it's like a game where it's a jam where like you only have one move, or a one scene jam, right? Like all these like little things where it's like, let's actually explore what it means. Like, let's explore this idea of like these little nuggets of design that change, that should be, I hope should be kind of getting people to think about what are norms, like what we kind of take for granted as designers, and then like consider them. What does it mean to write a game that just has one move? Suddenly like that one verb has so much weight to it. What is a game that takes place in one scene? What is a game that takes place like, you know, like even just like, let's make games that use the D4, right? Like just think about the D4, right? Like
The only reason I'm laughing is because there is this dichotomy that's happening in brain trust between those who do and do not like the D4, and for everyone that's listening that does not like the D4, that's it. That's all I have to say.
Listen, I'm telling you, for all those people, I used to be against D4s. I used to be like, I hate them. And then I like thought about them. I gave them some time. I spent like 40 minutes just rolling D4s, thinking about them, right? Like, and then like I think like limitation goes a long way. I think like, especially for a learning tool, right? Like when you think to yourself, boy, I hate, and I'm not asking people to like be uncomfortable. Like if you're like, I genuinely hate using the D4, I'm not going to tell them they have to do this. Design a game that just has D4s, right? Like if you don't understand, like if you're like, I don't know why people would want to use it, design a game that just uses D4s. And then even more so, think about them in a sense that is outside of just rolling them, right? Like, why do you hate them? A lot of people say, I hate rolling them. They don't roll. I go like, okay, what can you do with D4s other than rolling them? Or like, how do you make rolling them more fun? Or like, you know what I mean? Like, think like, what is like, to talk about like interaction, right? Like, what does it mean to interact with the dice you play? I've been tossing around this term a lot, which I think like I've been like consolidating a little bit more, which is like considered design. It's broad, but the idea is you don't. It's again like you don't take things for granted. You don't say my game has a GM because games have GMs. You kind of say like why does my game need a GM? And the idea can just be like, I want somebody to have control of the story more, right? That's considering it, right? Like I'm not saying you need to like write a thesis on why your game has. I'm just saying like, why does it have a GM? Tell me why. And then usually sometimes people will think about it like because of that. Like I think about it because of that. I go like, does my game need a GM? When I think, why does my game need a GM? Or how do I make my GM more interesting? How do I make that role more interesting? Right? Like, why does my game roll 2d6? Like, oh, because that's PBTA, like because the math is done, right? Like a lot of people are like, you know, John Harper already did the dice math. Forged in the Dark dice system works. And that's fine. I do that a lot too. I hate dice math. So I'll just be like, somebody else did it. Yeah, I was like, somebody else did it for me. Like, sure, why not? But like, consider. Oh, by the way, to loop this back to the initial question, what I like is happening is the like thinking about design. What I want to see happening more is people talking like considered design. Like think why like 2d6 does not make PBTA. You know what I mean? Like,
yes, yeah.
That's the thing that I think is like, or even just like rolling 2 dice doesn't make PBTA, right? Like why? And similarly, I'm like, you should reference and be aware of your influences, but don't be afraid to say that this is my thing, right? Like you can say like this is a hack of a PBTA game, but also like if you've put a ton of effort into it, like be proud of it. Be like, I've made a thing, right? Like if you think, oh, I changed 2D6 to 2D8, you're kind of like, and it uses moves, but it has like a Blaze in the Dark style of things. You're kit bashing a game, but you've still made your own thing. I've moved on to a different thing, but like this all loops back into
it all comes together. Yeah,
it all comes together into considered design, right? Like think about like. I want people to ask themselves questions more, I think is the thing, right? Like I again, a thing I always talk about is I say like, I think about rolling dice a lot, right? Like, what does it feel to roll these dice? Why do you roll these dice? Like, what dice are you rolling and how does it feel to roll them? When you do a dice pool system, people are like, I love just rolling a bunch of dice. And I'm like, that rules. Think about that. Like, mull that over. How do you make a game that gets people to consider the fact that you are rolling a bunch of dice? Like I like, and I can sometimes tell when it's just like, oh, I've made a game that uses a system because the system does it, right? Like even in hacks, it's like, oh, the system does this thing, so I do this thing. And to use like kind of established stuff, I'd say like, I like the game Monster of the Week, right? But like Monster of the Week does a lot of things that Apocalypse World does because Apocalypse World does it. Like that's how I kind of feel. There's a lot of just reskinning. It's a fun game, but it's clunky, it's old. Like I think, and then you look at newer PBTA design and you go, like Passion de las Pasiones, right?
Yeah.
Like
I was about to say
that game is a PBTA game, but it doesn't roll dice. It doesn't have stats. It uses like conditions, like they are the same genre, but you can clearly tell that Passion considered PBTA. You know, it considered its medium. It thought about what it's doing, and I like that. Like that. That's kind of what I want people to, I think, be more open about. I see it in the world, but I think like the more we are allowed to question productively, you know what I mean? Like, not point fingers and be like, why did you think this? Like, I don't want other people to be like, why the like, how dare
Where's your dissertation? Hit me with the theory, dude.
No, exactly. Like, sometimes the answer is, I like it. And I'll be like, cool. Make games that you fucking like playing. Like, you should never be forced to do what you don't want to do. All of my games I make are games that I want to play. You know what I mean? So, like, similarly, like, I think that's what I want to see. I love exploring what design is, and I want kind of more open discussions about, like, why you think that, or, like, or why you shouldn't move past, like, you know, like, why you should think differently, or, like, yeah. People are like, I don't like the D4. The D4 is just the greatest example of this. I don't like the D4, and when I go, why, right? You'll give, like, legit reasons, and then I'll be like, how would you do it differently? Like, what would you do if you could only roll D4s, right?
Well, that's the only dice that existed, right?
The Royal Game of Ur, like the oldest game known to man. I think so? No. The Royal Game of Ur is not the oldest game. It's a very old game. Uses D4, and I love it.
The other day I was just considering, like, instead of, there's this keyword in my game called integrity, and it's for, like, HP of, like, a door or a creature or something like that, and something I'm swimming with. And because my game is heavily based on Magic the Gathering concepts, I remember having life point countdown die. And I loved how, like, when you lost life, you would turn the die over to indicate that HP, right? So, like, why not do the same thing with different sizes of dice? That both creates a free miniature for you, the person, so you don't have to buy, like, a dragon mini. And putting a D20 on your tactical play mat, it feels way different than putting a D4 on the play mat, right?
Exactly,
so, different ways to use the dice to just kind of, like, resonate with what you were saying.
100%. And I love that. I want people to use dice in weird ways. It brings me life.
Amazing. What a great trend session. Future games, what you're working on now. I mean, I'm sure you're working on like 5 games at one time, but the one that you pitched to me is Epsilon Engine. So, Viditya, talk about Epsilon Engine.
Oh, boy, I love this game that I'm making. It's like...
I love my games.
Listen, I do. Is there a game that I made that I don't like? No.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
I've got a big brain.
I got a big brain, and I'm not afraid to say...
The world is better for it, I promise.
Are there things in my games that I wish I could do again differently? Sure, but, like, they're done. Like, I have newer, better games to work on, right? Like, I'm not going to sit around and be like, well, I'm going to make a 2E of the 3 games that are... No, it's fine. This also is not a call-out to people who like to remake their games. Just fucking do it. I just can't. But this is a call-out for people who are only working on one game. Make more games, because you have a big brain.
It's me.
Yes, it is.
I'm that guy.
But this isn't the segment. The segment is not call-out corner. This is talk about Epsilon corner. Epsilon Engine. So the thing I love about Epsilon Engine, so like it's super work in progress. So like... And I have a hard time. I sat on it quietly for a long time because I have a bad habit of, and this is probably very relatable to people, getting really excited about a project, telling a bunch of people, and then like letting it die, right?
Yeah.
So like I've let it sit for a while before I was like, no, this actually has legs. And then I started talking about it publicly to then hopefully keep myself in momentum. So right now, it's very work in progress, and I've done like one quick slice playtest just to see if the core mechanic works, and it does. But Epsilon Engine is like, to harken back to the beginning of this episode, a lot of my games have like a Pathfinder DNA to them. Whether that is, I really liked this about Pathfinder, but I hated everything else, and I want to make games that hone in on the thing that I like about it, or I hated this about Pathfinder, and I want to make games that don't ever touch on these things, and like how could I do it better, right? Like it's this idea of like how can I do what I don't like about this game better? Like it chooses to engage in this, I'm gonna play on its level but do better than it, right? Epsilon Engine kind of is me going, ooh, you know what I loved about Pathfinder? Scrolling through the Pathfinder SRD, like D20 PFSRD, and looking through a bunch of feats and classes and coming up with fun character builds that like I'll never make. And I had my old group like literally build characters for me because I just was like, I can't do the math. I fucking hate this. But they loved doing the math. So I'm like, okay, here, I have a character. I want to make a character that uses a shield and a whip, right? And they're like, boo. All right. And then
they're like, why, dude?
Yeah, but they would like give it to me. Like my friends enjoyed that challenge. They were like, this is a challenge and we're going to make it work. Which is also why I'm like, people who complain about like min-maxing ruins games, I'm like, it doesn't. Because you can have both. Like they're not mutually exclusive, being able to play what you want and also roll good, you know? So Epsilon Engine's whole ethos is builds without balance, right? And I love that phrase because it's like, I want to have that sensation of you being able to just like come up with a character that does a bunch of cool things and has that like and is built through looking through things, like looking through catalogs and looking through pages and being like, that's a really cool ability, I want it, right? And then being able to like build this character out of all these like various Lego bricks and be like, I made him. This is mine, and it's cool. You know, it holds a flame, like, you know, and also, like, and like that's the thing I love about Pathfinder, and like Epsilon Engine is like my first big game. Not first. Space Between Stars, I would say, is probably a pretty big game, but like in terms of scope. But Epsilon Engine is like, it's like I want to try and take a crack at like a Genesis or a Spire or a Pathfinder, right? Like a game that kind of, and this is like another major 3 point of it, is that I want to make a game where people feel comfortable making content for it. And like these were all the ideas that I have. I know I haven't even talked about the game itself yet, but like I think this is important, is that I'm like excited about it because it's like all these different ideas that like, and I'm looping it into like a lesson real quick that I learned from making a bunch of smaller games. I like learned various little tools and like single mechanics with single games that I've made or sketched out, like that aren't even out, that I've just kind of written up, that I can then go, oh, here's a synthesis of a bunch of mechanics and concepts. And Epsilon Engine's whole thing is that like it's like this like fun synthesis of a bunch of ideas that I messed around with to the point like I can tell you all the through lines and inspirations, but it is not a hack of any of them. It is 100% like my design. So let me actually pitch the fucking game now. It's supposed to be, so like I'm a mechanics first person. I'm so sorry, Jeremy. This is gonna be such people out here, these listeners are like, get to the goddamn point already. This is the point, listeners. I'm a very aggressive podcaster.
Listen, the movie doesn't show you a scene for no reason. So just true. Keep listening.
This is it. I hope. So I'm a mechanics first person, or there's like I have a weird dichotomy. I love world building, I love setting building, but I sometimes, but I feel weird asking people to play in settings that I wrote. Like I'll always kind of write world building elements to things. I'll be like, you make the setting because if you're attached to it, you'll love it. Because when I write a setting, I'm attached to it and I love it. And therefore, I want other people to feel comfortable in the world that they're making, right? Like when you play in a game that you have had a say in, there's that buy-in. So Epsilon, so the actual like system, like the Epsilon engine is the name of like the system, is its own like kind of thing, and it's a little like I'll get into the mechanics of it, but like the built-in setting that I'm kind of working with, like the point is that it has like a mechanics loop, but it's very tied to a setting. So like as a designer, you can like write up a bunch of content that like makes a lot of sense for your setting. But the Epsilon game, and I think this is just a really fun pitch. So like the tie-in setting that I'm writing for it is a setting that I really like called Epsilon City, thus the name. And the Epsilon City's whole thing is I wanted to make a game that was like weird sci-fi with aliens and shit, but no FTL, like no space travel. I didn't want to worry about other planets and stuff like that. Like, to the point where I was like, I don't even want players to be like, I want to go to space. It's just like...
It's not allowed.
Yeah. So, like, it's like an alternate Earth. Like, okay, so the pitch is 100 or so years in the future of a parallel Earth where magic exists. We have, like, hyper technology and really cool magic. And humanity has, like, made a bunch of really cool shit. Like, we're, like, way in the future. We're, like, utopia-ized and stuff like that. But we have not cracked faster than light travel. So they try... So, like... a bunch of the top scientists and engineers and spellcasters all try and come together and do the impossible, which is mix intense magic with intense technology to create a faster than light engine. As soon as they turn it on for the first time to test it, to see if it works, it explodes in like this ginormous explosion that ignites the core of the Earth and turns it into a wormhole and causes like the Earth to crack apart, and all of its parts just start blowing up. But then in like a few frames of a second, every parallel Earth that's trying this exact same thing, all of like all the highest level magic users are like, uh-oh, and then like tether the various chunks of Earth to each other in their parallel worlds through the wormhole, and doing so overlaps every parallel dimension at once. So you have like this like huge city. So like the thing is like then after this whole calamity happens, you have this continent-sized super city of all of these different species from all these different parallel Earths, and it's called Epsilon City, named after the engine, the Epsilon engine that blew up. And there's this big old crater, like this big old hole. It's not even a crater, it's just like a hole in the middle of it that overlooks this wormhole that used to be the core of the Earth that things come out of. And you just have like it's like an infinite city. So the point is, I'm like, this is my convoluted reason for why you can have magic and sci-fi and aliens and like werewolves and vampires. Like anything could be possible in this world because like you just have fun with it. And that's like the pitch. So I'm like, that's Epsilon City, and that's like the game I'm building is like, here's your setting buy-in, but also anything is possible in this setting, so have fun. Like, do what you want. If you want to have like a section of this where like it's just a fantasy medieval fighting game, sure. Just say there's this weird district in Epsilon City where medieval times like blew up, or like, you know, a parallel Earth which is still during like like fantasy D&D times just overlapped onto us, and you're like, uh-oh, guess we're playing in this now. Like, it's
literally Faerun.
No, exactly. And so that's like, and in a setting like that, I'm like, I don't want people to care about whether or not their dice are good. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I want them to just have fun. Like, just go, like, bonkers, to balls to the wall, just, like, enjoying themselves.
Absolute gonzo. I love it.
Mm-hmm. So, like, the actual mechanics of Epsilon Engine are, like, you have like stress, like you have like active skills and passive skills. Active skills you roll dice for, passive skills you automatically succeed. So there's this idea of like, you're not rolling dice all the time in this game. Your competent characters is another like ethos for it. Like a theory is like, I want to make competent characters that actually like can do the things that they want to do, right? There's a lot of games which like, I would say like 5e is like a competent character system, right? Like it's just like, you're not failing all the time. It's not the point. The point is to kind of have fun and to succeed. Like I brought up earlier, I want to make games that are about succeeding a little bit more, and that's what like Epsilon is. But it's like a game of like keeping track of like fatigue. So every active skill, when you like actively try and do something, when like the outside world has an influence on your innate ability, has a fatigue tracker. So you're like tracking fatigue. So whenever you roll for your pursue active skill, like pursue is whenever you try and chase something down, you like tick a fatigue in it. Like you're using it so you get a little more tired. And if you max out on fatigue, you take a fracture. And like that's just like, oh, you've pushed yourself too hard. Here's like, there's no health, right? It's just like, here's like a narrative penalty that has mechanical, you know, penalties to it. So it's like, oh, I'm trying to pursue, but I pushed myself too far. You're like, depending on the action, whether it's like I'm literally trying to run after somebody, you can be like you're winded, right? Like your fracture is you're like incredibly winded, and you're just gonna like take penalties to pursue for a while until the recovery action is just you take a break, right? And then like, so that's, and then also like your fatigue track. It's a very visually game, so I hope people can follow along. I hope you're following along fine. But like each fatigue track also has like boons and banes. So like when you roll dice, you not only get a binary success and failure, but every roll also nets you with a few boons or banes, and you can kind of see where you are. So like the more tired you are, the more banes you'll get, and banes are just kind of narrative currency for the GM and the players at the table to be like, oh, these are additional things that go wrong whether you succeed or not. And then boons are the same way, where it's just like good things that happen to you. And so you have like passive skills, active skills, boons and banes, fatigue, and doubles. So like another whole thing is you're rolling d6 in this game. For people who care, it's a d6 pool. 5s and higher are a success. So you're rolling dice and you're looking for 5s and 6s. Doubles, when you roll doubles, they're like a spendable currency. And advantage dice. So advantage dice, sorry, I'm just laying out a bunch of mechanics, but
no, keep going.
Keep going. I know what. Like, just stick with me, everyone. And then advantage dice, which are just D4, and I'm very happy with this little bit of tech. It's just like you roll D4. They act the exact same way as other dice, but they are just incapable of succeeding. Like mathematically, they cannot roll them, but they can create doubles. Like the whole point of advantage dice is that they like help you create doubles, and you can spend those doubles to do things. So these are what I call gears. Like I have like a metaphor that I use a lot with games is it's like gears. So like my game is like, you know, it's a machine. And all of these are little gears in them, and they all kind of turn and make the game happen. And each of them on their own, it sounds like a lot, but like by testing it, I'm like it seems like it is a higher competency game, like in terms of that. Like you kind of have like these base mechanics that take a little bit to get used to. Like you're not going to get it right on your first roll, but like by your third roll of your first session, it seems like people who are used to a little bit more complex games, and they're like, okay, this loop seems to make sense to me, and I really like that. Like that's what I wanted to make sure happens. But the point of Epsilon Engine is, and like a design thing I can like, advice I can give to people that I like to think about is like gears that then expand based on how you want to play your character. So you have like all of these different options, and based on what kind of talents you get, talents are like feats, they're whatever, they change up how you play. So again, like builds without balance is some characters like the Urbaneer is like one of the starting characters, or the Thread Baron. I also just love giving them like really ridiculous names.
Yeah.
Like the Urbaneer. So all of the different starting talents that I've written out already mess with one of these gears. So I just listed a bunch of stuff, but when you play the game, you as a player have a baseline of just knowing what these are, but then you get to focus in on one of these mechanics. So your gear, like, so the Urbaneer's gear are boons and banes. You want to like push your fatigue around so that you get to declare these boons and banes and get and then like basically world build. Like the Urbaneer's whole thing is that they could be like, oh, I like spend these boons to like create a doorway that wasn't there before. You know what I mean? Like, oh, like I found a way out. Like I put myself in a bad situation. I have banes, right? I've rolled banes, so these would normally be bad things that the GM can throw at you, but then you get to say, like, I'm spending them to put myself in a bad situation, but then put a friend in a better situation, right? So their whole thing is, like, very, like, high narrative, kind of on-the-fly world building, while the, like, Thread Baron is kind of like magic, and they gain a new active skill called, I think I changed it to Gaze, and it's like actionable phrases when you like gaze at the threads of reality, right? Because their whole thing is they're like a magic class that they like bend reality to their will. That active skill, you're not going to roll it often, is the idea, but it becomes like a mana track, because you can take fatigue to gaze to get other actions benefits. So like that's kind of like what I like about Epsilon Engine a lot, is like this builds with that balance. This like I get to make a crunchy game that people can opt into. Like there's a base level of complexity, but then you get to opt into what you care about, right? So like if you want to manage fatigue, play a Thread Baron, because the whole point of it is that you now have like one of your fatigue trackers is mana, and you can take fatigue to it, and you're not rolling it too often, but if you still go over, you take a fracture. So you have to worry about that. Wow. There's like other ones, like the Bullet Witch has like items, and like their whole thing is they care a lot about doubles. Like the I think like that and the Brink Mage, like they care a lot about spending doubles. You gain a lot of abilities where like when you roll doubles, you get to like spend them to do things. The Bullet Witch is like you have a cool gun and you're building up how this cool gun messes with magic and stuff like that. And like so that's like a big tenet, and I think like I really like that about a complex game, that like is a nice synthesis of a bunch of things I've done throughout my years of game design. And then like on top of all this, like even if, and this is like another thing I really hope for it, is this might seem like a complex game, and like I said, there is a base complexity to it, but I wanted to read like I wanted to read simply. Like I hate reading games where you're like, oh, like there's just like a bunch of dice numbers and pluses and minuses like right in the middle of a statement, right? Like when a spell is like, hey, oh, it's like, oh, you get like this really cool fireball and it does a lot of cool things. Add plus 1d4 L to your like B50 roll, and I'm like, I don't know what this fucking shit is saying, right? Like it's got like a bunch of numbers after it that like I need to know what these numbers mean in these order. So like in Epsilon Engine, I really want to make a game where like everything, like you can design for this game by basically just writing out statements. So like with boons and banes and stuff like that, like you're always rolling and generating them. So like when you make content for it, like the way you know on a character sheet whether or not you can spend boons and banes for it, it literally just says like declare a boon as cool statement, right? Like when you get boons on the table, you can say I want to declare, like my character can declare a boon as finding a way out, right? So now you know, like, you just have it on your sheet. You're just like, cool, when I get a boon, I can do this. Right? And you just have, like, these lists of phrases that aren't, like, dice necessarily, right? Like, it's not, like, additional, like, it's not math, right? Like, when you think about games that have, like, kind of a complexity to them, that have builds, like, it's not, like, dice that stack on each other. It's not things, it's narrative power that stacks on each other. So, like, as a player, you're looking at your sheet and it should also like tell an idea, like in like plain English should tell you what your character can do because you have all these cool shit. And I want people to understand cool shit even if they don't understand the game, right? Like again, it's like, oh, you have like your witch gun. Like as like a bullet witch, you have your like witch tech gun. And that just sounds cool. You know, and like my witch tech gun can scream and disorient the enemy. Spend a double to scream at the enemy, right? Or like to whisper in your ear a weakness of your target, right? That is all on top of just rolling dice, and if you see doubles, you get to do it, right? And like that's kind of the point of it. Like so that's why it's long-winded, but like the idea is like complexity that's approachable, and there's a bunch of gears, but you as a player opt into how much of the game you care to like deal with, right? Like so like it's I'm very happy with where it's going. There's like a bunch of other small things, like various talents have like like I think about progression constantly in games because I'm never happy. Never happy. No.
Period.
I'm never happy with progression in games, and this one I want it to be like if you want the talent serial liar, right? Like you're just a really, like you lie constantly and you get bonuses to lying. The way you unlock it is not through leveling. It's through like every talent has a prereq, and the prereq for like liar is gain a reputation for being a serial liar. So like narratively, you're just playing through it. And the idea is that like you kind of flip through the game catalog in the book or like the website or whatever, and you go, I like this. I want to play towards it. Right. And then like you tell your GM, you tell the table, hey, I'm trying to get this talent. I'm going to be lying a lot. And again, like, and that prereq doesn't say like, and succeed, you know, like there's no like threshold to it. It's like a conversation with the table to be like, oh, do you all think that I have now like gone a reputation to it? Like there's like a trust that's supposed to build at the table, a conversation about like a meta plot as well, right? Where you're like, I want to lie a lot so that people go, I'm not going to trust you. You're known for lying a lot. And then you go, cool, I got a cool new ability because the world has reacted to my character's story. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's another like talent, which is just getting like sick. Like they're called like I forgot what they're called. Cyber arms, but like PSYBER. And its prereq is get some sick ass arms. Like get some sick ass cyber arms. And like the point is that you could just like go to your GM and be like, hey, I want these cool fucking like cyber tech arms, which it's like for the bullet witch, where like if you punch somebody, you can instead like you punch them physically, but you also punch their psyche, and you can spend doubles to then fight them in their mind. Like you like do damage. Like it's kind of like plugging in a port into their psyche,
oh my
and
God.
then like fighting them in their mind for a second and doing like damage to them within themselves. And so the point is that you get to like go to your GM and your table and be like, I want these fucking arms. And then the GM is like, okay, cool. Let's tell a story where you go and get sick ass arms. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then at the same time, like other players will be like, hey, I really want like this ability and I want this ability. And you're like, as a table, kind of crafting a story where everybody gets to do their cool thing. Like at the end of the day, like maybe the quest to get these sick ass arms also has the player who wants to lie a lot in it, right? It's like, oh, you have to break into this place. And it's like, cool, I'm going to just say we're allowed in. And you're like, but you're not. And it's like, yeah, I know. I'm trying to set
trying to do the thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to set a reputation. So like that's like kind of the idea of like you're like looking at things, you have a bunch to work with. There's a lot of gears in place, but you should still be like having fun. And the idea of the passive skills is you can just say like, oh, I have ranks in facade, which means like people have trouble figuring out when I'm lying, right? Like I'm just good at that. So the GM doesn't have to ask you to roll all the time. They could just be like, you're telling a story, you have the ranks in it, cool. This is what you're able to get away with. If you want more, you can then roll on top of it and stuff like that. So it's a big complex game and I'm just like really happy with it. And I think like if, listeners have stuck around for this long to listen to me, my biggest piece of advice is like, I've made so many small games that taught me all of these little things that I feel very confident in my ability to synthesize it all into a thing. All right.
We did it. We made it.
I'm sorry. I just want to...
No, don't be sorry. It's great. You now are going to take the crown for longest episode.
Oh my god!
On the podcast, it's great. No, don't. Oh my god, I love it. This is not shade throwing. This is an achievement for sure.
I tried to like throw in there. I'm like, this isn't just me talking about a game. I'm trying to give advice at the same time. I'm like, this is why I did it. This is why I think it's good. Like, I hope like that wasn't just me talking about my mechanics, but also like you get to kind of. I want like people to see the thought process, right? Like I want people to be like, you could make these things. Like this isn't like not just like, oh, I have brain blast ideas. It's like, how do you like think about how do you think about games like I think about games, right? Like how do you get to a point where you're confident in yourself to make a big project and it's not something that is daunting, you know what I mean? Or like I don't feel like I'm in over my head, I think is the important thing. Like a lot of people try and make their big heartbreakers right out the gate and like, they get trapped in it. But I'm like, here's my heartbreaker. There you go, Jeremy. Here's my heartbreaker and it like and I feel comfortable in it and I want like other people to feel comfortable in their heartbreakers and like why it happens. So yeah, okay.
Yeah, all right.
No apologies anymore. I'm going.
Yeah, no apologies. Wow, what a treasure trove we have gotten today. The only unfortunate part of that whole thing is that you literally answered every one of my questions that I had for Epsilon. No joke.
So it was just me talking. Oh.
No, I love it. I feel bad that I don't have like a stronger rebuttal system. No, the biggest things that I take away from what you said, and this will sort of lead us to the space of wrapping up here, is that one, I definitely want to pick your brain more about. You just have to come back because you have so much to say. We just automatically have to do a part 2.
Yeah.
But I would love to pick your games around sort of your conceptual gears framework, because when you say it out loud and you sort of illustrated how you are using that in your game, and I think about Kaleidoscope, part of my design is that I'm trying to create this piecemeal system similar to what you're doing. You have these base mechanics, then you build a class out of that concept, right?
Yeah.
And so when I think about this gears application, I'm already thinking about like, okay, what can I play with? I can play with like my tempo initiative. I can play with like harm. I can play with clocks. I can play with all sorts of these different things and make those talents, but for me it'd be like disciplines or a more like structured class tool set thing, right? So that's very fascinating. The other thing that I really want to point out that I love about Epsilon is how you use the D4 advantage dice, right? Because in your game, you didn't say it, so this is the one thing you didn't say, but you can spend doubles to make another success for yourself as you roll in the game. And I love that advantage die don't automatically give you a success. They work towards a success. And I think what that very effectively delineates is that it's an advantage, not an assurity of the situation, which is very, very, very cool. In fact, it's one of the biggest reasons why I'm very excited about Epsilon Engine or Epsilon City. I don't know which is going to be the title of the game, you know?
I don't know either. It's the engine. I'm just going to say like the because it's a whole thing. Yeah, so it's the
yeah. So I love that. I love the talents concept. You know, I agree with you on like there is no balance, right? A long time ago, I had spoken with Spencer in like his first episode on the podcast, and we talked about there are worries about balancing more tactically complex games when you make those sort of like battle-oriented styles of systems. But technically, you can make that tactical battle system because, you know, when you brought up Pasión de las Pasiones, there's no stats. They use conditionals to produce advantages for moves, right? So you can have a tactically complex game that's super unbalanced because the balance is shifted towards looking at the narrative rather than numbers. When your game is about the PEMDAS of how does a fireball work, right? Yeah. Then it matters. But if that's not the case and you have that narrative focused lens, I think you can really get away with lots of like crazy, like I constantly think about making like the anime, the RPG in some fashion, the big explosive, unique power, hero protagonist, overpowered, whatever. And like you live that power fantasy and have all those outrageous like moments. And it not affect your experience at the table either, right? You don't want to be One Punch Man at Saitama and have no fun, right? Because exactly. Everyone else is not you. But if it's narratively focused, because Saitama only engages with the fiction when Saitama wants to, right? Yeah. So if you can capture that essence, then it's then I think that it would be a fun game because you could be Genos, you could be Moomin Rider, and still in that same group and still have a blast.
Exactly. Yeah. Like what? And I think it's like the thing that I worry about, and want to make sure that I like get people into is like if let's say you have a situation where like you have somebody who's built their character to be Saitama, right? Like be this like, oh, I just gotta punch our big bad once and we're done. The idea is that like the table has a rapport that understands that that's not fun if you just punch the person, right? So like the fun part of it is to like with One Punch Man, like I think like the point is like if you were to make a One Punch Man RPG where like literally everybody is Saitama, or like the fun is not I get to blow somebody up with one punch. The fun is how the fuck do I land the one punch?
Exactly,
right?
Exactly.
Like I'm trying to punch the guy, but they keep not doing it, right? Or even better, it's like I mean, even like the One Punch Man like fighting game that came out did it really well. Where like the point is that Saitama is 10 minutes away and cannot get to you.
Yeah,
and the
exactly.
Fun is how do we survive long enough for Saitama to come in and beat him in one punch? Like that's like where the fun is, and that's kind of like what I hope to accomplish with this, which is like even if these situations get wildly imbalanced, right? Like you have somebody whose entire character is that like I can convince anybody to do what I want. I'm hoping I don't make a character that does that because I feel like that's a little weird.
Right,
but like,
yeah, I'm tracking.
But like, you know, it's like I can get into any place I want no matter what, right? Like and like the table knows that, like the GM knows that. So they're not going to make an adventure, an episode, a session where the challenge is get in, right? Like the challenge should be like, okay, you can get in no matter where you want. Cool. You get in. But like it's a mirror, like it's like a mirror maze of a place. So like it doesn't matter that you can get in. Like you can do that and you've like successfully done it. Like good job. But then it ramps and then you go like, okay, it's party comp, right? Like if you have like even in D&D, it's like make a situation where the fighter gets to be a fighter, the bard gets to be a bard, and the paladin gets to be a paladin. You know what I mean? It's like have fun. Like like if you have like like, you know, you have your three characters who's like one person who's really good at fucking killing things, one person who's really good at infiltrating stuff, and one person who's really good at talking to people. You have to like, I'm hoping that I can make a game where like those people can build the character that they want without worry about like not being good at it, because the point is you are good at it, so you should be good at it. And then at the same time, everybody works together to allow the other person to have their moment to do the thing they're good at. Yeah, it's a fun and challenging thing to design. Like that is so important to table culture and safety, right? Like I feel like that's like a part of safety tools at a table is like, how do you make sure that players feel included to a lesser degree, but like than like literal actual like feel comfortable. But yeah, it's like, how do you curate table culture in a game that's as like wildly open as it is?
Yeah, great stuff. Yeah, good stuff. Just good stuff. Well, I think that is going to get us to the end of this amazing episode. Viditya, it's been a journey, and I don't mean that in a shade way. I mean that I was here for every second of this ride. And you've informed a lot of, there's always this interesting event that occurs for me, and I hope for listeners as well, where, you know, there are certain things you're like, okay, I think I have a grasp on this theory, concept, principle, whatever have you, about my game, my style of game design, my frameworks, whatever. And then someone on the show will say something or illustrate something, and I will go, well, now my entire like ecosystem has changed because of this one thing, right? I'm a very like systems thinker, so like if one gear in the machine changes, the machine is different, it operates differently. So I hope that other people are being influenced in the same manner. I think they should be, because you had a lot of good stuff to share today. Thank you for being on the show. Where can people find you? Go ahead and plug something you want people to buy. I mean, it better be Space Between Stars, but this is also good advertisement stuff for you. I want you to be, you know, be proud of your work, people. When you come on the show, plug your stuff, plug yourself. Here we go. All the links will be in the show notes.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, you know, follow me on Twitter. I've been trying to push a little bit more, trying to like talk about these things a little bit better. Like, I'm usually not that great at saying these things like in text form, but I'm trying to get a little better at that. So follow me. And then also, like, yeah, on Itch, like, if you want to, Space Between Stars is like a good like beginning point of a lot of like what I like about design. And then like, if I were to tell people to go through like a journey of my games, Space Between Stars is like kind of unedited, so it's a little tough. But if you then go to like a Space Goblins, which talks a lot about like rotating GM, but then is like unabashedly about like, you know, none of the characters die. It's really like teamwork driven, but also the GM is like the referee is constantly changing. So it's like taking that concept of GM-less play, but then making it like rotating. So there is always one person in charge, but that person changes. It's like lateral hierarchy is what I call it. And then like 6C GM-less is another synthesis of like GM agnosticity. So like everybody's playing with the same rules, but the narrative control changes. So like your like character sheet all has the same stuff, and everybody plays with the same mechanics, but one person can be a character, like one person could be an adventurer, and they're just playing a normal trad/OSR game, while another person can be playing the townspeople, and they interact with the game in the same mechanics, but they narratively interact with the game very differently. So like that's kind of, and then like similarly, if you really like the world building, because we actually didn't talk about how much I love world building, but like Space Between Stars has a really good world builder in my opinion. Like if you ever want to just make a space setting, I would recommend looking at it and taking its Session Zero stuff. Like, even if you make the characters and don't play the system, you can take those, I think, to another system and have a very fleshed out game world and characters. And the Galaxy Builder is free, but I have a game called A Land Once Magic, which is in early access right now, so it's just a PDF. But it...
Can I execute this PDF?
Yeah, I don't know. There's really no game here. There's just a PDF. But if you were to, really try and find a game in there, what I mean is it's just an exported Google Doc, which I know is tough for some people. So that's why I bring it up. But I will say, like, if you have an exported Google Doc as your game, like, fucking good job. I love it. Like, you don't need to lay out your stuff. It's not your fault. But
yeah.
A Land Bridge Magic is just a game about, it's like a post-fantasy world builder. I try and take a lot of ideas where you can build a fantasy game that like is decolonized or explicitly asks you to think about the colonized aspects of fantasy. So it's like fantasy is full of a lot of problems, and I think like it's tough to decolonize a genre, but if you're, again, like considerate about what's happening in your world, like you're not just like allowing weird bioessentialism to happen, but you're thinking about a world of like where magic works differently for different people. Like, why is that? How does it work? I like it, but it's a world builder that kind of takes those aspects of Space Between Stars. So if you liked what you were hearing about this and you like the game, here's like, again, like I said, like I design gears, but I test those singular gears in other systems, or I take that and try and like see what happens when I push it the furthest. And like that's a good kind of journey around things. Like I think like based on what we've been talking about today, those are kind of the stuff. Other plugs real quick. I mentioned it before, but like I would love it if people listening to this were to follow All Nerds Here. We're currently on our 3rd season playing a game called Corazon Station, we're playing a show called Corazon Station, which is a sci-fi telenovela drama in the Pasión de las Pasiones game by Brandon Leon Gambetta. It's really fun. We're an all POC cast. We put a lot of love into our world and our game, and I think we do a really, really amazing job. And I would love to see more people watch us, and all the people at All Nerds Here too. That's one show I'm on, but then like you should stick around for Sunflower Street plays for the dungeon. It's just a bunch of puppets, so that's really great. And then similarly, like look out for the new content for the Musafirs podcast, which again, it's an all POC cast. It's an own voices for me, for the GM, and for another player on it. So it's also really good. I think like, yeah, I'm trying to. I want people to like support PSC developers, BIMPOC developers, and their projects.
I'm with it.
So yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, fucking Draw Your Dice. I love it because it's a good show, and also I'm like, it's great to see like, it's great to see like a Black creator like putting content out that's about talking about content. It's just good. It's great. I love it.
It's what I'm here for. It's what I was made to do. I don't know what I was made to do, but I was cloned. Anyways, that is all the time we have today for Draw Your Dice. Thank you so much for being here with us. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. And we will catch you next time. Say bye to the people, Viditya.
Yeah, wait, can I came into the crowd. Can I get a crowd as well? Y'all were great. I'll sign autographs later. All right, just meet me out back.
No.
I've been eaten by a demon.
All right, that's a wrap. Viditya, I would love to have you back for another 4-hour seminar because you are such a powerful designer. I wish you all the best toward your successes. All the games we talked about today, along with all the links to get in touch with Viditya, will be down below in the show notes for your access. If you liked the show and found it helpful, please send a tip my way by donating on Ko-fi as well as Venmo at DYD Podcast. Or, if you are unable to provide monetary support, you can provide support at no cost by sharing this with someone you thought of while listening to this episode and leaving a review. Both of these methods greatly impact the success of this show and lets me know that what I'm doing is beneficial to designers out there. If you finally got your game off the ground and out in the world, you can tag me at JeremyGage5 over on Twitter with the hashtag #IDidIt. That's IDYDIT. Thanks for listening, and I will catch you next time.